James H Fetzer, better known as Jim. You're in London. There was a symposium last night, debunking 9/11, and you were one of the main speakers. Can you tell us about that event?
Precisely right, yeah. We had the good fortune to have Ken O'Keefe from the Freedom Flotilla fame as our master of ceremonies. I spoke explaining how 9/11 can't possibly provide a justification for these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan because the whole thing was a charade with many false elements, including violations of laws of physics, aerodynamics, and engineering. Kevin Barrett, as co-founder of Muslims for 9/11 Truth, spoke about moral and religious aspects of this and how religion and morality also do not support these interventions in violation of international law, the UN Charter, and even the US Constitution. And then Gillett Otzman, the celebrated jazz musician and political commentator, addressed the political rhetoric that has been used to justify them, also collectively showing that there is really no justification whatsoever for these wars of aggression.
Your background is in many areas of research, and you're especially knowledgeable about the JFK assassination.
That's true. I've done extensive work on the assassination. I chaired or co-chaired 4 national conferences. I've published 3 collections of scientific studies of the assassination, produced a 4.5-hour video, and I've given hundreds of interviews on JFK.
How did you get involved in that subject?
Well, that was fairly occurred because I found that the editor-in-chief of a prominent journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association, was abusing his position to promote a political agenda. And it occurred to me that if someone of his standing would do something like this, perhaps those of us with special background and ability had an obligation to become involved, which otherwise I might not have done.
So you felt a moral obligation to do an investigation?
I did indeed, and when I wound up organizing a research group of the best qualified individuals to ever study the case, a world authority on the human brain, who was also an expert on wound ballistics, a PhD in physics, who was also an MD and board certified in radiation oncology, so as an expert on x-rays, one of the physicians who had treated JFK when he was brought into Trauma 1 and then 2 days later was responsible for his alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, a leading photo analyst who even advised Oliver Stone on his film, and another PhD, this time in electromagnetism, who is very important in scientific research that has proven that the whole movie of the assassination, the Zapruder film, is a fabrication.
I saw your presentation the other night, and there's some incredible detail there. So how did you pull all these people together to get involved in this investigation that you did?
Well, my background's in the history and the philosophy of science, and I've done a great deal of research not only on the nature of science and the nature of knowledge, but on the theoretical foundations of computer science, artificial intelligence, cognitive science, evolution, and mentality. So I've been dealing with the most difficult technical subjects in the area of philosophy in general. When I became involved in the study of JFK, I knew that it was scientific research that was going to be the key to exposing the charade that had passed for the official account of the assassination, and indeed it was by going back and reconstructing the case from the bottom up, sorting out the authentic from the inauthentic evidence that enabled us to sort out what happened.
So are you a minority among scholars in America who are interested in exposing things like this?
As far as formal academicians are concerned, yes, it's a very small number of those of us who have taken such a role. Another would be Peter Dale Scott, who is a professor of English at the University of California, and another in relation to both JFK and 9/11, as is the case for me. But also David Ray Griffin, who is a professor of theology from the Claremont Graduate Schools, who's become the leading expert in the world on 9/11. Well, I think something didn't seem right to me. It wasn't so much the planes as the towers disappearing, you know, into this massive quantity of smoke in such a brief period of time. But it was quite a while before I became seriously engaged. I recall having written an article around 2004 for a local alternative newspaper that was enumerating a couple of dozen reasons why things weren't right, but I only became serious about it after actually I'd received an inquiry from David Ray Griffin, who told me he admired my research on JFK and wanted to know if I'd collaborate with him on a book on JFK and 9/11. That never specifically came to pass, but not long thereafter, in the midst of finding myself with a group of talented people, it occurred to me to create a society that might support lectures, you know, publish books, organize conferences, and so forth, and I founded Scholars for 9/11 Truth.
And your book, 9/11 Conspiracy, The Scamming of America, it's a pretty controversial title. Did you get a lot of opposition to that?
Well, what I knew was by picking the title, The 9/11 Conspiracy, what I was saying was true either way, because the official account of 19 Islamic fundamentalists hijacking these 4 planes, outfoxing the most sophisticated air defense system in the world and perpetrating these atrocities under the control of a guy in a cave off in Afghanistan was itself a conspiracy theory.
Well, exactly. I mean, the conspiracy theory was the official story.
That's exactly right.
And I think it was obvious to a lot of people, but the thing is with like last night's event, which was fairly well attended, as far as the 9/11 movement, the Truth Movement, or the 9/11 Scholars Movement, which you're involved with, how would that compare in America to here? In other words, if there was the same event as last night in America, would that be packed out? Would it be a full house?
Well, that's a great question. I have participated in larger and smaller presentations. Probably the largest was the American Scholars Conference held in Los Angeles at the end of June of 2006, which was organized by Alex Jones, where the most important event was a panel discussion that had Stephen Jones, my co-chair from Scholars, who's a physicist, Bob Bowman, who's a former director of the Star Wars program for Ronald Reagan, another Scholars member, Webster Tarpley, who authored 9/11, Synthetic Terror Made in the USA, who's one of our leading experts on covert operations, and myself. So you had Alex Jones chairing and 4 members of Scholars, and this was recorded by C-SPAN.
Yeah, I've seen it.
It was an hour and 45 minutes and then broadcast 7 times at very good viewing times. So I think that actually shattered the glass ceiling that had inhibited public discussion of 9/11.
When do you think there was a big sea change about the public waking up to it?
I actually think this event was the key. There were 1,200 people in the audience and C-SPAN, and I think millions upon millions have witnessed this. And subsequently, actually, just before the event, I was invited onto Hannity and Combs, and Colonel Oliver North was sitting in for Sean Hannity.
I saw that.
And they had called me to tell me they wanted to interview me about the discoveries of Scholars. But as I was in the waiting room, I had them bring in a TV. And I saw the lead-in, which said, "You're not going to believe what your children are being taught in college." So I knew they didn't know enough, because while I talked to my students about 9/11 a lot, I did not have a course on the subject, so that when Combs asked me, is this a required course, I could explain to him that they had made a mistake because I had organized a research group not to teach but to figure out what had happened, but I thought it was a great idea. And I also was able to use the phrase that they had their facts foxed, which I actually would use when they brought me back about 6 weeks later again.
You've got to have a soundbite. But didn't you go back with Bill O'Reilly?
Yeah. Well, that was a different kind of event, because O'Reilly doesn't really give you a chance to speak up.
Journalism, it's called.
He's there lacerating you. He gives one long head hominem.
So you're a traitor. You're a traitor to America.
Right.
That's what you say. You're a traitor to America.
Yes,
Thank you. We don't need to know. We know your website. That's it.
Very close. Very close facsimile. That's what he did. Because he laid on one very long ad hominem and said, well, we'll let our listeners decide that. Then he went on to another. So I never really had the chance to go back to the first. But it astonished me. I thought that it was my least successful performance because I had so little time to talk. But I've gone back over it. And I actually got about a dozen important points. And I was at an event in New York on 9/11 that was sponsored by Alex Jones. And I was seated up with some first responders. And the fellow next to me said, "You know, Dr. Fetzer," he says, "what got me into this was watching you on Bill O'Reilly." And I thought, well, you know, maybe that made a difference.
Well, I mean, when I see that kind of thug journalism, I can't actually believe I'm seeing it.
Well, I envision my role there much as Muhammad Ali with a rope-a-dope. You know, I was letting him take his punches, you know, to wear him down. And, you know, I got some key points out, including the website and so forth, and where people could learn more. So perhaps it had some benefit.
It was later shown in Plain Sight, the documentary.
Yes.
Dave Von Cleese did an analysis of it.
Yes.
And he counted how much airtime you got compared to O'Reilly's.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's about 5 minutes to 1.
Yeah.
It was very disproportionate, but he's that way.